Their greatest failures, and how they recovered, is not a collection of dramatic comeback stories designed to inspire applause, but a quiet, uncomfortable examination of moments where reality overpowered confidence and exposed the limits of even the sharpest minds. The best investors, builders, and financial celebrities did not avoid failure. They encountered it directly, often publicly, often painfully, and often at points where they believed they finally understood the game. What separates them from everyone else is not the absence of collapse, but the way collapse was metabolized rather than denied. The first thing to understand is that their greatest failures were rarely small. Minor mistakes teach little. The failures that reshaped them were existential in nature. Concentrated bets that went wrong, leverage that arrived one cycle too early, partnerships that betrayed trust, or macro assumptions that held for years and then broke violently. These moments were not intellectual puzzles, they were emotional shocks. Capital was lost, reputations were questioned, and internal certainty was shaken. For many, these failures occurred after periods of success, when confidence was highest and caution had quietly eroded. In the immediate aftermath, the response wasn't heroism, but disorientation. The best among them did not instantly bounce back. They experienced doubt, embarrassment, and a deep questioning of their own judgment. This phase matters because it reveals a truth often skipped in sanitized narratives. Recovery does not begin with confidence, it begins with humility. Those who recovered allowed the failure to fully register. They did not anesthetize the pain with excuses or external blame. They stayed with the discomfort long enough for it to teach. One of the most critical distinctions lies in attribution. Financial masters who recovered took responsibility without turning responsibility into self-destruction. They separated outcome from identity. "I made a flawed decision" did not become "I am flawed." This separation preserved psychological capital, which is essential for recovery. Those who internalized failure as a verdict on their worth often became defensive or reckless. Those who treated it as information, brutal but precise, retained the ability to learn. Their analysis of failure was slow and structured. They did not rush to extract lessons while emotions were raw. Time was allowed for clarity to return. When review began, it focused less on what happened and more on why the decision felt reasonable at the time. What assumptions were taken for granted? What risks were acknowledged but emotionally discounted? Where did ego, reputation, or past success distort judgment? This level of analysis is rare because it requires honesty without self-protection. A recurring theme in their failures was overextension. Success had expanded opportunity faster than discipline could absorb. Leverage crept in quietly. Complexity increased. Optionality narrowed without being noticed. In hindsight, the warning signs were visible, but familiarity had dulled sensitivity. Recovery, therefore, often began with contraction. Positions were reduced. Businesses were simplified. Focus returned to core competencies. This contraction felt like regression to outsiders, but internally it was relief. It restored control. Another essential component of recovery was rebuilding trust, both external and internal. Externally, this meant transparent communication with partners, investors, lenders, and teams. Financial masters who survived did not disappear. They explained what went wrong, what had changed, and what would be done differently. This transparency preserved credibility even when performance suffered. Internally, trust was rebuilt by honoring new rules. Reduced leverage was maintained. Position sizes stayed smaller. Risk controls were obeyed even when temptation returned. Time played a non-negotiable role. Recovery was not immediate. Many endured years of underperformance, smaller deals, or reduced influence. This period tested patience more than intelligence. The temptation to win it back quickly was constant and dangerous. Those who truly recovered resisted this impulse. They accepted slower compounding as the price of survival. In doing so, they rebuilt confidence gradually, not through one bold move, but through many correct small ones. What also changed permanently was their relationship with certainty. After major failure, arrogance rarely returned. Even when success followed again, it carried a different texture. Conviction became quieter, more conditional. They listened more sized risk, more conservatively, and built redundancy into decisions. This was not fear. It was wisdom earned at cost. The scar tissue was functional, not paralyzing. Perhaps the most important shift was philosophical. Failure forced a redefinition of success. It was no longer about peak net worth dominance or recognition. It became about durability alignment and the ability to continue playing the game without losing oneself in the process. This redefinition insulated them from future emotional extremes. Success no longer intoxicated, failure no longer annihilated. Over time, the very failures that once threatened to end their careers became structural advantages. They could recognize fragility earlier. They could sense when narratives were outrunning reality. They could counsel others not from theory, but from lived consequence. This is why many of the most respected financial figures are not those with the smoothest records, but those with visible scars and sustained relevance. And it is precisely here, where failure stops being an event and becomes a turning point in identity, that the deeper story must continue, because understanding recovery requires more than describing resilience. It requires examining the internal rewiring that occurs after trust in one's own judgment has been broken and rebuilt, and how that rewiring permanently alters behavior standards and risk tolerance going forward. And it is from this unfinished reflection, mid-thought, and intentionally unresolved that we must move forward as the sentence continues into the next part, where the long-term consequences of failure, both limiting and empowering, finally come fully into view. And it is after this internal rewiring that the most enduring form of recovery begins to take shape. Because the best investors do not simply return to their old methods with added caution. They fundamentally change how they relate to risk, identity, and time. Failure strips away illusions, especially the illusion of personal infallibility, and what remains is a quieter, more grounded decision-maker who no longer needs constant validation from outcomes to feel competent. One of the first permanent changes is how they size risk. After major failure, concentration is treated with suspicion. Even when conviction is high, exposure is moderated. They understand viscerally that being right is not enough if timing is wrong or structures are fragile. Position sizing becomes a moral discipline, not a mathematical one, a daily reminder that survival is the highest objective. This shift alone often accounts for much of their subsequent longevity. Their relationship with leverage also transforms. Leverage is no longer seen as an accelerator of success, but as a compression of time, one that can erase decades of effort in a single cycle. Many who recover choose never to return to prior levels of leverage, even when conditions appear favorable. This restraint costs them upside in euphoric markets, but it buys them sleep clarity and the freedom to endure when conditions reverse. In the long run, this trade-off proves advantageous. Another change lies in how they engage with narratives. Before, failure stories about markets, technologies, or macro trends can feel persuasive and coherent. After failure, narratives are treated as hypotheses, not truths. They listen, but they verify relentlessly. They seek disconfirming evidence. They assume that what everyone knows is precisely where hidden risk may reside. This skepticism is not cynicism. It is intellectual self-defense, forged by experience. Social behavior also shifts. Many financial masters become more selective about whose opinions they absorb. They reduce exposure to echo chambers and cultivate relationships with those who value truth over affirmation. This protects against the social reinforcement loops that often precede major errors. Isolation is avoided, but independence is strengthened. They are comfortable standing apart without feeling compelled to justify every decision. Recovery also deepens patience. Having experienced the consequences of haste, they allow ideas to mature longer before acting. They revisit assumptions repeatedly, waiting for clarity rather than forcing resolution. This slower tempo often produces better outcomes, not because the ideas are smarter, but because the timing is more forgiving. They have learned that urgency is often a signal of emotional involvement rather than opportunity. Importantly, failure recalibrates ambition. The drive to dominate, to be the best, or to maximize wealth often softens. In its place emerges a desire for coherence, alignment, and sustainability. This does not reduce competitiveness, it refines it. They still seek excellence, but excellence is defined internally rather than socially. This shift reduces risk-taking motivated by ego, which is one of the most common causes of repeat failure. Over the long term, these changes compound into a distinct style of leadership and investing. Decisions become less frequent, but more durable. Systems become simpler, but more resilient. Communication becomes more transparent. The individual becomes a stabilizing force rather than a source of volatility. This is why many of the most respected figures in finance are those who have already been humbled by the market and survived. The final and perhaps most profound recovery is existential. Failure forces a confrontation with identity. Who am I if I am not winning? Those who recover answer this question honestly. They anchor identity in process, character, and contribution rather than outcomes. This anchoring is liberating. It allows them to continue operating at high levels without the constant fear of loss or the intoxicating need for affirmation. Freedom replaces compulsion, and so the story of failure and recovery resolves not in redemption arcs or triumphant returns, but in transformation. The market takes something away, certainty, illusion excess, and in return offers something rarer, perspective. Those who accept this trade become more than they were before the fall. Those who resist it often repeat the same mistakes under different guises. If this exploration of failure has resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and continue these deep, honest reflections together, and leave a comment, sharing which aspect of failure or recovery you found most challenging or illuminating. Because understanding how great figures recover is often more valuable than studying how they succeed. And it is through these hard-earned lessons that real wisdom in investing is formed.